It started like any ordinary day in New Hampshire. Karoline Leavitt, a rising political figure and passionate advocate for justice, had no idea that a routine court proceeding involving her younger brother would spark a firestorm. But when she learned that the presiding judge had publicly mocked her brother during the hearing, not for his case, but for his appearance and background, Karoline knew she couldn't stay silent. What she did next didn't just make headlines, it sent shockwaves through the local justice system. Outraged but composed, Karoline requested the official transcript of the hearing. What she read confirmed her worst fears. The judge's remarks weren't just unprofessional, they were personal. He'd made sarcastic comments about her brother's speech pattern, hinted at his family's lack of discipline, and even questioned whether he was raised right. Karoline, known for her measured tone in public discourse, took a different stance this time. Within 24 hours, she held a press conference outside the courthouse. Calm, confident, and resolute, she detailed what had happened and called for a formal review of the judge's conduct. The video went viral. Support poured in from both sides of the political aisle. Teachers, veterans, former defendants, and even retired judges shared their own stories, echoing concerns about systemic bias and unchecked judicial behavior. But while many applauded her courage, others accused her of using family for political gain. Behind the scenes, Karoline wasn't focused on the headlines. She was focused on her brother, who hadn't wanted any of this attention. For him, it had just been a humiliating day in court. For her, it was now a turning point. As pressure mounted on the court system to respond, Karoline was faced with a choice. Continue pursuing the matter through official channels, or take it one step further. A decision that could change not just her career, but the course of her family's life. In the days that followed, the courthouse remained silent. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement. Karoline, however, was not. She began gathering testimonies from others who had appeared before the same judge, and the stories were disturbingly consistent. Subtle mockery, dismissive tone, a pattern of belittling those who came from working-class families, young men of color, or anyone who didn't speak perfect English. The issue, it seemed, went far beyond her brother. As the story gained traction, a civil liberties organization reached out, offering legal support and urging Karoline to file an official complaint with the state's Judicial Conduct Committee. Her team prepared a 37-page dossier, complete with transcripts, sworn statements, and video evidence from multiple hearings. But as Karoline pushed forward publicly, things at home became more complicated. Her brother, a quiet, private young man who had never asked for the spotlight, began to withdraw. The media attention made him anxious. Friends treated him differently. At school, a few classmates whispered about him in hallways. He told Karoline he appreciated what she was doing, but he missed his old life, the life before the judge, before the cameras, before the fight. That night, Karoline sat alone in her apartment, staring at the glowing laptop screen filled with draft statements and pending interviews. She had started this to defend him, but was she now dragging him through a storm he never wanted? The next morning, she faced a decision. Accept a primetime interview that could amplify her message nationwide, or step back, recalibrate, and focus on her brother's healing first. And for the first time since this all began, Karoline hesitated. Karoline canceled the interview. She called the network producer herself, thanked them for the opportunity, and said, "I need to take care of my brother first. The decision raised eyebrows, especially among her political advisors, but to Karoline, it felt like the only right move. For the next few weeks, she stepped back from the public eye. She took her brother hiking in the White Mountains, something they hadn't done in years. They stayed up late talking, not about the case, not about politics, but about childhood memories, music, college plans. Slowly, he started to smile again, laugh again, heal. But while she stayed quiet, others did not. The State Judicial Conduct Committee launched a preliminary inquiry. Whispers began circulating that the judge in question had faced previous internal complaints that had mysteriously gone nowhere. A whistleblower from inside the courthouse reached out to Karoline anonymously, hinting that some files had been buried or reworded to minimize their impact. The system wasn't just flawed, it was protecting itself. Karoline knew then that this was bigger than her brother's case. It was about who had power and who didn't. One evening, after dinner with her family, she quietly reopened her laptop and began typing. But this time, it wasn't a press release or a complaint. It was the first draft of a speech. She wasn't sure when or where she'd give it yet, but one thing was certain: she would give it. Because what started as a defense of her brother had become a reckoning. The speech began to take shape. It wasn't angry, but it was firm. Karoline chose her words with care, not to tear anyone down, but to call out a system that had gone unchecked for too long. She spoke about fairness, dignity, and the quiet cruelty of institutional indifference. And most of all, she spoke about her brother, not as a victim, but as a young man who had been humiliated in a place that was supposed to uphold justice. By the time she finished the fifth draft, invitations had already started arriving. Colleges, town halls, even a national legal ethics summit wanted her to speak. But Karoline still hadn't decided when or if she would deliver it. Then came the leak. Late one Thursday evening, a local news outlet published internal documents from the courthouse. Previous complaints against the same judge, ignored or dismissed without explanation. One case in particular stood out: a teenage defendant from 3 years ago who had accused the judge of making racially charged comments in open court. The complaint had been sealed. That boy had committed suicide a year later. The story hit the front page the next morning, and everything changed. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Law students organized forums. Civil rights groups called for the judge's immediate suspension. And reporters flooded Karoline's inbox, asking for a statement. But Karoline stayed silent. She visited the family of the boy who had passed. Quietly, privately. She didn't bring a camera crew, didn't post about it online. She just sat with them, listened, cried, apologized for not having known sooner. That night, she stood in her childhood bedroom, holding the printed copy of her speech. Her fingers trembled slightly. It was time. But just as she was preparing to step forward, an unexpected message landed in her inbox. The subject line was only 3 words: "You're not clean." Attached was a scanned page from an old case file, sealed, confidential, and with her name on it. Karoline stared at the screen, her breath catching. She hadn't seen that name in over a decade. Karoline hadn't seen that name in over a decade. It was from a sealed juvenile record, something that had happened when she was 17. A confrontation in high school. Heated words. A moment she had long since made amends for, both legally and personally. The court had dismissed the charge, and she had moved on, believing it buried by time and growth. But someone had been digging. She took a deep breath. Whoever had sent that message wanted to rattle her, to remind her that no one in this system was above reproach, not even those fighting for justice. The unspoken threat was clear. Stop now, or we make this public. Karoline didn't flinch. The next morning, she delivered the speech. She didn't try to hide the past. In fact, she began with it. "I've made mistakes," she said, voice steady before a silent auditorium. "I was angry once, reckless. I hurt someone I cared about. The justice system gave me a second chance. But what about the kids who never get that chance? What about those who are judged not by the law, but by how they look, how they speak, or where they come from?" She paused. "My brother was mocked in open court. Another boy lost his life after being humiliated by the same judge. These aren't isolated moments. They're symptoms of something deeper. And I will not be silent." The room erupted into applause, not because she was flawless, but because she was honest. In the following weeks, the judge was placed on administrative leave pending formal investigation. A bipartisan panel was assembled to review patterns of judicial misconduct across the state. And Karoline, though reluctant, was approached about running for a statewide office focused on judicial reform. But none of that mattered as much as what came after her speech. That night, as she sat quietly on her porch, her brother stepped outside and handed her a mug of tea. He didn't say much, he never did. But as he sat beside her, he said one thing she would remember forever. "Thanks for not giving up on me, even when I wanted you to." And in that moment, Karoline knew something that no headline could ever capture. She hadn't just defended her brother. She had reclaimed something much bigger, the right to speak, to fight, to be heard, no matter what they tried to use against her. And this time, she wasn't going anywhere.